Welcome to the Key Chapters of the Bible podcast. This is a daily podcast that's going through the key chapters of God's Word. Hey everybody, this is Russ, and thanks so much for listening to the Key Chapters podcast. As you probably know, I'm on sabbatical right now, so what we're doing is we're uploading episodes from last year. That means the audio may not be great at times, or maybe even have some glitches here and there. So thank you for your grace and your patience, and I hope this podcast just continues to be a blessing to you in your walk with the Lord. So with that, here we go with today's episode. So as we're now going to 1 Samuel chapter 4, let's talk about how the ark was captured. You've probably already read the chapter, so we're just going to highlight some of the setting situations going on here. The people of Israel now in the promised land, they did not fully drive out the nations, and so they are now suffering the consequences of their disobedience. We're going to see that throughout their history, they're going to be just having to battle other nations. And so one of the people they battle were the Philistines. You may have heard of Philistines because David and Goliath. Goliath was a Philistine. And so here's one of their early battles. Getting into our passage here. Verse 1 starts on out, the Philistines are near a place called Aphek, and so the Jews want to go on out and defeat them. Now this location, Ebenezer and Aphek, they're something along the lines of 20 miles or so west of Shiloh. Remember, Shiloh was the religious hub of the region at that time. And this area is also about 15 to 20 miles northwest of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem really isn't a major city back then, but at the same time, just kind of helping you know the rough area. It's northwest of Jerusalem. And so the Israelites go and they go battle the Philistines near Ebenezer, but they're defeated. About 4,000 of them are destroyed or killed. Verse 3, the people take this as a sign of God. They wonder, why has the Lord defeated them? The Hebrew is literally, why did the Lord strike us? And so it was very clear that the Lord was not with them. And they thought about it and they said, well, you know what? It's because we didn't have the ark with us. And so they send some people back to get the ark, and Eli and his sons hear about this, and they figure, well, that's probably a good plan. And so they agree, Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's sons, agree to take the ark into battle. And so they bring the ark on back to the battlefield, and when the Jews see it, they're just so excited because, well, that's obviously the solution to our problems. In verse 6, the Philistines hear this upcry, and they're wondering what's going on. In verse 7, they figure out, it's because the ark is there. Now we're dead. And they're terrified. In verse 9, they say, you know what? Let's just galvanize. Let's be men. Let's just fight our hardest. And so in verse 10, they fight and defeat the people of Israel, and 30,000 Israeli foot soldiers are killed. And those are heavy losses in any battle. Verse 11 tells us also that Hophni and Phinehas were among the dead, and worst of all, the Philistines had captured the ark. And so with this defeat, a messenger runs from the battle to Shiloh, where Eli and the people are. Eli hears the news of the death of his sons in verse 17. He seems to take that all kind of in stride. After all, it is a fulfillment of prophecy. But when he hears the ark of God was captured by the Philistines, this is too much for Eli. He falls off his seat and breaks his neck and he dies. And things continue to go bad because Phinehas' wife, she was pregnant and she hears the news that her husband and her father-in-law are now dead. She collapses and gives birth. And as she's about to die, she names the baby Ichabod, which means, where is the glory? And this whole tragic scene serves to underscore the obvious displeasure of God over his people. And so that's the passage. That's 1 Samuel chapter 4. Now, why is this a key chapter in our study of the Bible? Well, here's a couple reasons. First, this is giving us the backstory of the transition from the Judges to Samuel. At this point, Samuel is something of a young man. He's maybe 29, 30, in that range or so. And now he's going to have tremendous responsibility placed on his shoulders, and he's going to be leading Israel for the rest of his life. We're going to see that Samuel is a faithful, devout leader whom God uses to bring about something of a revival among the people as he turns them back to God, and God even uses him to anoint Israel's first 2 kings. Second, this chapter is helpful to just see a couple things that we even speak of in our own day, kind of how they tie back to this passage. For instance, we sing this song. It's a hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessings. And I'm not going to sing for you, but it includes a well-known phrase, Here I raise my Ebenezer. And when you sing that, you're like, what is going on? Well, that phrase is referring to the victory that Samuel has actually in 1 Samuel 7:12. But the victory there is so sweet and joyful because of the loss here. And in that victory, Samuel raises a stone as a monument to the Lord and to God's victory. He calls that stone Ebenezer. Of course, it relates to this passage. And then also the word Ebenezer means stone of help. And so that song is just celebrating the help we have, the God who is our help, the rock that he gives to us as that help. Now, there's also another term that we use in today's phraseology that comes back to this passage also, and that's the word Ichabod. Sometimes we might use the word Ichabod if we're just talking about something where there's just great distress and it just seems like God's judgment is upon us or upon a situation. He's removed his blessings, his presence. And we might say, well, it just seems like it's Ichabod. And that term originates to this passage here. Fourth, the ark is captured here, and we're going to skip over chapters 5, 6, and 7, but if you read those passages, or if you read those passages, you're going to see that the ark brings great suffering on the Philistines. So they're going to return it back to the people of God in Beth Shemesh in chapter 7, but the people there disregard the holiness of God, and they open the ark, and thousands die. And that is the event that is referred to in the movie The Raiders of the Lost Ark. Remember at the end where he says, Harrison Ford says, don't open the ark or don't look in the ark? Well, he's referring to this event there where the people look in the ark and they die. The ark is not something to play with. It is not a toy. Well, now as we wrap up this chapter, let me just kind of go over a couple takeaways from this passage here. For one thing, this passage shows us a common mindset that people have. These guys go into battle and they're like, what happened? Why'd we lose it? And they figure, well, it must be because we don't have the ark with us, which is basically a variation on rabbit's foot theology. It's thinking that somehow this actual physical thing has power. People all the time, they think that there's power in a necklace or there's power in some superstitious thing, to win a baseball game or something else. And movies love to do this, where there's something that person has, and it's just trying to ascribe power to a physical thing. And that's this rabbit's foot theology here that is not okay with God. God will not be manipulated. God doesn't want us to bring trinkets around, thinking that somehow that represents his blessings or his presence. He is calling us to be faithful and walk with him. Because the purpose of the ark was to point them to the covenant that they were in with God. Remember, the terms of the covenant from Deuteronomy 28 and 29, it's that they would obey God and he would then bless them. It wasn't they would carry this stuff around and he would obey their agenda. The covenant was that they were in fellowship with him, obeying him. And so carrying the covenant, like when Joshua did that into the Jordan River, that was just showing that they were being faithful to God, obeying him, doing as he said. And if the people have no desire to obey God, if they have no desire to keep up their side of the covenant, there's no point in bringing this ark around with them. And so the point here is you can't manufacture the presence of God. You can't manufacture the blessings of God. God's presence and God's blessing isn't related to the kind of music we might play or some kind of ceremony we might do. It is for those who are going to walk with him in covenant obedience, who listen to him and obey him, worship him and glorify him. That is how you have the presence of God in your life, not through carrying around some kind of rabbit's foot thinking that somehow represents the blessings and the presence of God. Another thing we're seeing here, we're seeing that even leaders are human and frail, and just because a leader is a part of something or condones something doesn't mean it's right. Here we have in this passage, Eli and his sons Hophni and Phinehas, they're agreeing to take this ark, but we know from 1 Samuel 2:12 that they did not know the Lord. And so just having religious people involved likewise doesn't guarantee God's presence or his blessings. We will always be able to find people who pretend to speak for God or say things that we like. We need to be looking to those who are calling us to actually follow God and walk with him. Those are the servants whom we should listen to, and that's what Samuel is going to do as he leads the people throughout the next several decades. And so those are some thoughts from this chapter here, and as you now go and just maybe spend some time with the Lord in prayer, maybe ask him to just guide you to where you're obeying, where you're not, and ask him to help you to see just what it means to walk with him in obedience and in fellowship with him. Also, this might be a good time just to pray for your leaders. If you go to Wellington Community Church, I know that myself and the other men would love and just so cherish your prayers, that you'd be praying for us that we will be walking with God and not walking according to our flesh or just the mindset of the world around us, but according to God's truth. And if you go to another church, pray for your leaders because you just need to be faithful to the Lord and be like Samuel, calling people to God, to obedience and fellowship and faithfulness to God, even if it's not popular. God blesses Samuel. God shows his disapproval of Eli and his sons, and pray that your leaders be those who are like Samuel, just faithful to the Lord and walking with him. So thanks again for listening. So great to be a part of these studies with you. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a great day.